everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I thought it would be interesting to delve a bit into where personally I think Pretty Little Liars kind of disconnected itself from what it truly used to be. I think with every show you watch, and it's not just with Pretty Little Liars, there comes a time where there feels like there's a disconnect in the show and things just feel a bit off and kind of not the same as they once were. And change within a show is so fine, and I encourage it most of the time once storylines have been completed and stuff. But for me, there was a point in Pretty Little Liars where watching the show was no longer fun and it felt a bit more of a chore, and it didn't feel like, okay, this is like the Pretty Little Liars that we all know and love. And specifically what we're going to be zooming in on is the time jump. And this is there's a few time jumps here and there, but this is more specifically the 5-year time jump that happens after the CeCe reveal, because this moment for me ultimately in the show just felt really weird. It felt quite lost, and it felt like, you know, the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle that can't be found. There's something that was in it that just felt really just off. I don't know how to describe it more than it just felt off. It didn't feel like the show that I had been watching for so long. Now, when I had watched Pretty Little Liars, season 1 to 6 were already out, but season 6B and 7 were new, and as in being released weekly. So that was the first time I was watching the show actually week by week. And every time I watched an episode, I just felt really disappointed and really deflated, because there was nothing in the story that felt nice in terms of, it just felt off. Guys, I don't know how to describe it more than it's just like, it felt off and it felt different to what the show was. And ultimately, I am such a fan of the show ending after the CeCe reveal, because one thing I hate with a TV show, I feel the same about this with kind of Stranger Things as well. Sometimes you just need to end it at the perfect point. And sometimes you don't need the extra episodes in the extra season to continue portraying your points. I feel like 2 A's would have been enough. And CeCe's story was quite a big conclusion in terms of it had so many characters involved in the plot. So it felt like, okay, this is a big thing, and that should have just been it. Especially because like the Liars were finishing school and they were moving on to college and more adult life. I think just ending it at season 6 A would not have been an issue, and I don't think anybody would have complained about it. I think at the time, obviously you don't want a show to end, so you obviously want more seasons, and that's perfectly fine. But I think when you look back on it in hindsight, having a new season is fun when you're a fan, and it's exciting. It's like an album release. It's exciting, but sometimes you just need to kind of let it go and know when the time is right for it to end. I've come up with some things that I think kind of frustrated me about the time jump and how it led to ultimately its disconnect from the show that it used to be. I'd like to say as well, I was looking at the videos that I've made. I don't hate Pretty Little Liars. I feel like the majority of the time is just me complaining, but I promise you I love the show. I love it, and I couldn't imagine my teenage years without the show. I just have so much to talk about, and there's so much positives about the show. But I just like to talk about the negatives just to kind of explore it a bit and to see, you know, perhaps this was good about the situation, but maybe this could have been done instead. So I don't hate the show. I like to analyze it. Okay. Ultimately, the main thing for me that made the time jump feel really, really weird is that the thing that kickstarts, you know, the liars coming back and things like that is to do with CeCe. And the reason why the liars are stuck in Rosewood is because CeCe dies. My issue with this is that I don't think CeCe should have died. And if they wanted to kill her off, I think they should have done it during her A reveal. But ultimately, CeCe is a character we don't care about. CeCe in terms of attachment, I don't think the audience is as attached to her as they would be with someone else. So when AD's motive is purely to find CeCe's killer, I'm sorry, I don't care. I clap if you care. There's not one bit of me that's like, oh my god, that's so, you know, I'm gonna miss CeCe. What a tragic thing. Like, she was the villain in season 6. She was A, obviously. So I don't know why that death was the one that kind of kick-started AD in terms of like, I don't feel sorry. Are the liars supposed to feel sorry for all the trauma that they went through? Because I know they don't care. I'm so sorry. The amount of things that CeCe did to torture the liars, I'm sorry. Like, do we care? Like, I'm gonna be honest. I think the issue is they didn't know where to carry on with CeCe's story. Because obviously the season 6 reveal was really underwhelming and people had a lot of questions regarding the reveal. And I don't think the writers expected that. So I think the writers were kind of like taken aback and a bit like, right, how do we write CeCe now? And I don't think going forward CeCe was in their plans, but ultimately she had to be in their plans because the reveal was so underwhelming and there was so many questions still left about CeCe. Ultimately, I think CeCe's story was supposed to be finished and I don't think they expected her to come back. And I just feel like the storyline is very weak. Obviously, for Mona's A, we have Alison's disappearance and that's like a massive thing. And then CeCe's A is all about kind of the aftermath of Mona, and it was a much more darker version of A, and there was a lot more things, there was a lot more tension. Do you know what I mean? And Alison was still missing, obviously, so it was like the Alison thing was not sorted out. So for AD to just be like, oh, they want to find CeCe's killer, are the audience supposed to care? And are the liars supposed to care? The liars come back to Rosewood because CeCe is on like a trial thing to see if she can get let out. First of all, how... Actually, I cover this later, so we'll move on. But I think it would have been cool to see more of the kind of trial thing and to see more of the liars dealing with their trauma and PTSD and CeCe kind of learning really what she did to these girls. But killing her off was just kind of like, oh, is that it? There was so much still left to tell about CeCe's story, which is the issue because they didn't expect that. Do you know what I mean? But also, CeCe's death was an accident. And I'm not saying I wanted CeCe to die the most miserable death in the world because I actually quite like CeCe. Well, not like her, but like tolerable. Like, do you know what I mean? Anyway, her death was an accident. So this whole time, AD is trying to get at the girls because they think AD thinks one of them killed her. And like, that's like that situation. But then we find out that her death was actually an accident this whole time. So it just kind of made it a bit more underwhelming. It was like, okay, that was it. Like, I get what they were trying to do in terms of they needed a mystery for season 7, and a whodunit is a classic mystery to bring the show back to, but I don't think it made sense for a lot of how the show played out. And I think it was quite weak in terms of, like, I wasn't pulled in. I wasn't really like, oh my god, I must find out who killed CeCe. Like, that storyline was, to me, during season 7, was just like something that was just like on the side. Like, I didn't really care about it. And for that to be the storyline that brings everyone back together, I think you should care about it. But we just don't. I think it would have been interesting to explore CeCe a bit more in terms of, has she grown and healed from her trauma? Has she really had the chance to take in what she did to the liars? Or actually, has she still remained who she was, and she might have some involvement with Archer and how Archer was torturing Allison or something like that? But just to kill her off so quick into the new season was like, okay, all of that for what? Another really big thing for me about season 7 and why it just felt so weird was the relationships. And this is more because after the 5 years, the girls all come back with different partners. Arya had a boyfriend called Liam. Hannah had a fiance called Jordan. I think Allison was actually dating Archer behind CeCe's back. And then Emily and the whole Sabrina thing. And then there was a Spencer and Caleb situation going on. And when I tell you, you absolutely cannot root for these relationships. And it's not because they're bad relationships. They don't have any screen time. Like, they have screen time, but they're literally there for 2 seconds and you never see them ever again. That causes an issue for me because they're so hung up on the ships that kind of made the show and was like the teenage years of the liars, that there's no room for any growth or any development. And some of these relationships I think would have been nice, you know, a fresh relationship on the show and something we've never had before. I really enjoyed Toby and Yvonne, but that was another relationship too that annoyed me because they killed her off so that Toby and Spencer could kind of rekindle a little bit. So it was kind of like you never really could build into these relationships or kind of have attachment to these relationships or even root for any of these relationships, because ultimately once they came back, all of the growth that they had in the 5-year time jump kind of just gets thrown out the window because they come back and ultimately it's back to the ships that were previously. And I understand it. Like, these ships ultimately made the show and there was a lot of fan bases on the show rooting for these ships, and I completely get it. But to have a 5-year time jump where the liars have new, fresh lives and to completely ditch it the second that the show comes back after the time jump, it's kind of like, well, these relationships were for nothing. And I think they didn't realize that some of these relationships probably had potential, but we don't know because they were never really on screen. I remember when I was watching it with my friend Weekly, we were commenting about, like, where are these people? Like, we've not seen these relationships or these partners since like episode 1. Like, they're just not shown. And this was my issue, and I've spoken about this before with Arya and Ezra. Arya could have a different partner that was more suited to her age, but the show was so fixated on Ezra and Arya are going to be endgame no matter what. You knew that this other relationship would never ever turn into anything, so you could never root for it. And it was the same with these relationships. You knew as soon as Arya and Ezra saw each other again for the first time, they'd get back together. You knew that Hannah and Caleb, they'd get back together. So you can't start fresh with these relationships and perhaps explore something different. And like I said, I understand that there are fan bases within the show, and the ships were ultimately what made the show, you know, gave it the show some structure. But I think it's okay to go somewhere a bit different and explore something different. And it might make the audience uncomfortable in terms of like, whoa, this is different. This is not what we're used to. But like, that's fine. If you do it correctly and it makes sense and the characters have some development, it is so completely fine. And ultimately, there was no room for anything different. You just knew that the writers were so fixated on Caleb and Hannah will be endgame, Ezra and Arya will be endgame, Emily and Allison will be endgame, etc., that it's like we can't have any sort of rooting for other relationships that we might prefer, because we just know at the end of the day nothing will come from these relationships, because we know how the story plays out. We know how every boyfriend Arya has had has never been successful. Same with Emily. And I think they knew from the start they wanted Emily and Allison to be a thing. I don't like Emily and Allison together. I explained this in my plot hole video, but I don't think the chemistry is there. And I think they more did that for fan enjoyment rather than it making sense and it being a natural thing that happens. But these relationships will always be endgame, and that was the issue, because what if they weren't endgame? And what if other relationships which were healthier for them are a lot better? I remember Arya, I forgot the name of the boy, I think his name was Holden or something like that. That relationship was really nice because they were the same age and it was enjoyable, and you know, they went to things together, and I think it was really healthy to see Arya in that stage. But you could never root for them, because at the end of the day it was Arya and Ezra, and yeah, I get it, ships and whatever, but I don't know. My next issue is that I feel like a lot of characters got ruined in terms of like, I love Hannah, and Hannah is my favorite liar, and she was my favorite liar throughout the entire show. However, in season 6B onwards, she was so annoying. She was really irritating, and she was just really annoying to the point where it's like, I don't really recognize that character anymore, and I don't vibe with that character anymore. And character growth, good or bad, is completely fine. If they wanted that route for Hannah, I get it, okay? And it's time for growth and whatever. But it was so abnormal, and it was just so outbursty and just not normal. Do you know what I mean in terms of normal character growth or development? Same with Spencer. Spencer was always angry too, and it's like these characters like it kind of makes you not hate them, but it's like, oh, okay, I don't really vibe with you anymore. So I think the characters got ruined because the show went on for too long. I don't think the writers had a plan for a lot of these characters past season 6 A with the reveal, and I think it would have been so much better just to end it with CeCe's reveal, because the characters at the end of CeCe's reveal, they'd gone through so much together. Allison was finally back home, and they'd finally got rid of the second A, and it was so much more natural that all the characters were going off in their different lives, and you know, they were thankful for each other and happy to just put everything in the past and move on. So to ruin that and to bring them back and then ruin them, it's kind of like, well, we had a good thing. You could have ended it in such a good way, but instead it's like I'm going to loathe my favorite characters, and I don't want to do that, because these are the characters that have been with me for so long, and you know, they've been through so much, and I've had to see them go through so much. So now it's like, well, now I'm hating them a bit because they're just not nice anymore. It also felt like there wasn't much growth within the character stories, and like I said, I don't think they had a plan for stories, but the only story that I found really gripping and really emotional and really makes you grow with the character and to see everything they had gone through was the whole Arya and Ezra can't have children situation. I don't like Ezra. I don't like that man. Send him to jail. However, that story was really gripping because it was real. It was adult stories. And, you know, we had seen these teenagers go through these things, and they're finally adults now, and they're getting on with their lives, and they're going to go through things like weddings and having children. So to see Arya in a storyline where it was an actual adult life situation, and a lot of people had watched the show through their teens and were entering the stages of adult life and, you know, looking to start families or whatever. So to see Arya go through this story was really gripping and really interesting and really kind of hit home, I think, with a lot of people. And that was the one story I just remember that I'm like, that was really good, because it showed her growth and it showed where she is in her life, and it's showing us that she's no longer a teenager. Because most of these liars, because the issue is these liars came back from adulthood, and as soon as they got put into Rosewood again, they just acted like their teenage selves. And I think it's really unrealistic, because look, I'm 20 years old and I'm not, you know, this person has many life stories and whatever, but I'm not the same person I was when I was 15 or 16 years old. And the mentality jump you have from 18 to 20 is crazy. It's something, you know, when you think about it, the amount that you mature and the way you deal with things and how you have matured with that is crazy. And so I don't think these liars would come back and immediately act like their teenage selves. So to give Arya this storyline, it was really good and really interesting and a really good point in the show. But I feel like the other liars, their storylines weren't as gripping or weren't as kind of, not even dramatic, but I don't think we cared. Do you know what I mean? My next issue with the time jump, to me, AD was just pure cringy. I didn't ever feel like, oh my god, I'm so scared of this A. And I think that's for multiple reasons, right? I understand the show has to keep up with modern times and things like that. However, AD using emojis rather than text messages made it all comedic, and it just made it all like, oh, so AD is just really unserious. Like, I know they have to keep up with the modern times, but what happened to texts? I still text in 2024. Like, the emojis just made it so, like, I'm not taking this A seriously. I'm so sorry. Like, I just didn't ever feel scared or intimidated. And I don't think the liars did either. With Mona and CeCe, the A's were quite scary sometimes. And sometimes I was like, oh my god, like, this is not, like, it scared me. And I feel like the stakes were really, really high with Mona and CeCe. But with this AD never felt like, I'm scared. And I was more laughing at her than with her. Do you know what I mean? I think the emojis, when you've built your entire show on mysterious text messages, I don't think emojis cut it. I think these emojis, it's so out of place. It is so out of place, and it just felt so weird. What do you mean we've resorted to emojis and not text messages anymore? And also the messages popping up on the screen rather than like us seeing it through their phones. Pretty Little Liars, what happened to democracy? Have some decorum. We are not doing this. We are not doing this. And that's why I think season 7 should not have existed, because the liars aren't teenagers anymore and they're adults. And I think they're past the need for A. In terms of, like, do they care anymore? Like, they've been through it. They have been through it. They've seen it all. realistically, do they care anymore? And the weirdest thing about AD was, I feel like AD was like a side issue. Like, I never felt like AD was taking a main step here and a main, a center stage on the show. And it just felt like it was like a side, like a side quest, a side mission, should we say. It never felt like, with Mona and CeCe, A was the show. A was like everything. But with season 7, these people are adults now. I don't think they care. They have other things going on. They've grown up. Do they really care anymore? And I don't think they do. And I think we saw that. It just seemed like it was just like a nonchalant issue. It was like, oh yeah, AD's back, by the way. But anyway, like, it was just kind of like there was no threat. Nothing was at stake. I don't think the liars cared too much about what they lost. They've been through everything, and because their relationships didn't really matter, it didn't matter what they lost. Like, oh my god, Ariana Grande has just announced her album mid-recording. Oh my god, Ariana! So this carries on my next point about they're still very hung up on the teenage lives. I've kind of mentioned this throughout the video already, but like I said, these girls have developed into adults now, and the way you deal with things as an adult compared to a teenager, even if it's like 2 years ago, it's so much more different than what you used to do as a teenager. But when they come back, straight away it's back to what they did previously as teenagers, and I think it's quite unrealistic because you do change as a person. So we never really saw the growth and development that we were told had happened in the 5-year time jump. So what was the point in the time jump then? Because if there's no growth, we've missed out on 5 years for what? And then ultimately, my last point is that it's just so unrealistic. Like, CeCe had murdered people and had literally tortured and kidnapped 5 girls, okay? Planned to blow up Radley, was a stalker, things like that. And you're telling me it took 5 years for them to be like, you know what? Should we let CeCe out? And I understand it might be different because it would have been she would have been in like a mental institution rather than like a prison. But I still feel like she would have gone to prison. I think I've seen cases in real life where, people have been in a mental institution, but then after that they go to prison and serve their time. So I think it's quite unrealistic that CeCe just kind of gets the chance to be let out. So 5 years is not a long time for everything that CeCe did, and I think it's quite unfair for Alison to ask the girls to let her out. And I understand Alison obviously wanted to be close with her family, especially after Jessica De Laurentiis had passed away, but I think it's just so unrealistic. And I think the issue is they didn't know what story they wanted to be the catalyst to start the next season and a half, and so therefore I think the CeCe story is really like out of the blue and quite like, is this a bit unrealistic? Do you know what I mean? It's like, I really like the scene, I think it was Aria, where Aria kind of stood up in like this trial and was like, no, you know what, I'm not having this. I don't want CeCe to be let out. And I was like, yeah, good on you, girl. Say it again. Because, like, it's true and it's honest. And just because, and I think in the 5 years, just because you want your characters to grow and heal, it doesn't mean that they've forgiven the person who had done this to them. You don't have to forgive people to heal. And you don't have to just forgive and forget because you want to be a new person and grow and things like that. Because under some circumstances, I think it's unfair to ask someone to do that, especially the girls, and CeCe had put them through so much. So it's kind of like, well, it's a bit unrealistic. Personally, how I would have done it, first of all, I wouldn't have, and I would have ended the show with CeCe's reveal. It would obviously have had to have been different and better, but I would have ended it with CeCe's reveal and just end the show. I know the show means a lot to people and it's a big staple in kind of teenagers and 2010 era of TV shows or whatever, but sometimes you have to let the show go. You know, I'm not, you know, I wouldn't have been over the moon that it ended, but I think it would have been the right time for it to end. But if they wanted to do the final season and a half, I would have had a 6-month time jump to the point where the girls are now at college and they're at different colleges, all except for Alison, who is dealing with kind of losing all of her family. Then I would have had A come back. I don't really know what I would have done with the storyline for A to come back. Like, what would have been the catalyst for A to come back? Because I don't think it makes sense for there to be a third A anyway. But it would have been nice to see the girls, not nice, not nice, but it would have been cool, interesting to see the girls dealing with A whilst also dealing with going to college and becoming adults and having to learn to deal with things as adults and kind of that type of thing. Having to deal with their relationships. You know, maybe we see Ezra and Arya break up, and why did they break up, and to see that unfold. Same with Hannah and Caleb, like, properly, because it would have been, you know, they would have had to deal with A and college and their relationships and just looking after themselves. I think it would have been a lot more things are at risk here, because during season 7 and 6B, I didn't feel like anything was at stake, because the writers never gave me anything to be worried about. I didn't care about the relationships. The storylines weren't really anything. There wasn't anything to go off. But with if they did it in college, there would have been so much at stake, and literally like your college place at stake and things like that. So I think it would have been interesting to take that route instead of a 5-year time jump for it not to make sense. Do you know what I mean? Because then you also are dealing with Alison, and obviously Alison becomes a teacher, so we could see her go down that route. But also Alison having to deal with the whole aftermath of CeCe, and obviously her mum is dead, and you know, the fallout with her dad, and how Jason's coping with things too. I think it would have been interesting to see that, because like I said, things are at stake, and A would have things to destroy in their lives, and you would have felt some threat, but you never felt that within season 6B and season 7, because there was no reason to feel it, because the writers didn't give us a reason to feel it, you know? But yeah, that is it for this video. I would love to hear your opinion about the time jump below. Did you like the time jump? There's no right or wrong answers here. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean you don't have to like it. Maybe give me your positives on why you do like the time jump. And give your opinion on my opinion. Call me out if I'm wrong. Let me know. Yeah, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.